Well, last week on this very show, we said that if the government really wants to help U.S. jobs and U.S. business, it needs to shift much of its focus away from the large companies, the ones that we're always talking about in the news and so forth, that only make up about 2% of the jobs in the United States, and instead look at the remaining 98% of the companies, those that are less than 500 employees. What can the government do for them? Well, one idea usually discussed when we talk about job growth and so forth is deregulation. Most business owners will tell you that state and government regulations really hurt them, really hurt the bottom line. Meeting regulations, no matter what they are, it costs time and money, and particularly for small businesses who often don't have, a dedicated person who can handle, regulations. It's the boss, it's the CEO, it's the individual owner, right, who has to deal with all this stuff. According to the Manufacturing Institute, manufacturers spend an estimated $192 billion, that's billion with a B, per year to comply with financial, safety, and environmental regulations. That's an 11%, let's call it regulatory compliance tax. So you would think, I would think, in fact, that lessening regulations would help. But an article this week by Peter Busey, Deregulation Under Trump Won't Create a Windfall for Manufacturers, looks at this a little bit differently. Busey points out that deregulation under the current administration is likely to include these following elements. So you're going to see a rollback and elimination of existing regulations. President Trump has talked about that. Fewer new regulations, that's also been talked about. A reduction in regulatory agency budgets and resources, and less enforcement of regulations based on a combination of policy and lack of resource. And all of these obviously have been discussed in the roll-up to the election, and President Trump has talked about these things certainly after he was elected. So those changes should reduce the burden on business. But will it really? Busey believes the answer is maybe not so much. And here's why. First, federal governmental regulations are just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, think about it. Just because the U.S. government won't require or lessen regulatory compliance doesn't mean your state or governments for countries that your company sells into, let's say the European Union, or your customers for that matter, won't require compliance. So the net reduction in work to meet compliance requirements for all stakeholders might not be much. The net reduction might be much for some companies. Multinationals for sure might not see a real difference. I mean, keep in mind that the European Union often has even more stringent regulations than the US. So eliminating the US regulations part of it are going to have little effect, particularly for multinationals. Now again, for small companies, and we'll get back to this, for small companies, reducing regulations may help. Another reason Busey believes federal deregulation may not help much is because of, here's the word, risk management. Big term, been talking about it for a few years now. Risk-based thinking is a requirement of all ISO QMS certificate holders now, of which there are a lot, both large and small companies. Risk management is also something that all smart companies are doing regardless of whether it's part of an ISO QMS or not. I mean, it just makes good business sense. So just because the government may lessen or roll back environmental or health and safety laws does not mean that you want to stop what you're doing. It's all about risk mitigation. Most regulations, I mean, think about it, like them or not, most regulations are in place as a means of minimizing risk to the environment, employees, consumers, customers. So do you really want to get rid of those efforts just because the law says you don't have to comply with those regulations anymore? Is it worth the risk, is what Busey is essentially asking. He says this, Busey writes, deregulation might be a case of being careful what you ask for. To the extent regulations and enforcement are relaxed, operations and EHS leaders will have some tough decisions to make on how to capitalize on the situation. Even if there are cost savings to be had, will they be worth it? What will the effect be on risk profile, productivity, and reputation? In turn, what impact could these have on profitable growth? The best bet, says Busey, is that organizations plow cost savings, if any, of deregulation into better risk and EHS management systems. I will say, I think a lot of what Busey says here, as I said earlier, probably is true for large companies, large multinationals, who do business in other parts of the world or across state lines, because they have multiple regulations to meet other than federal regs, right? I mean, there's more going on here. For small businesses, I think it is very probable, very possible that small business owners are going to see some relief if federal regulations are loosened. I mean, to me, the bigger question though is this: even if it helps small business owners, will the impact to the economy and society as a whole be largely positive or largely negative? I mean, I said there is a reason these regulations are in place. They may be onerous. As we say very often, it sucks for some businesses, but for society as a whole, is it a plus or a minus?
In every case, in government, anything government, there's a pendulum that swings back and forth between basically a liberal viewpoint on various things and a conservative viewpoint.
And Reagan tried a lot of deregulation.
Absolutely, absolutely, which swung back in the Clinton years and ongoingly back and forth. And I mean, you're right. Is it a net positive or a net negative? I mean, it's very close, actually, I think, because there is a lot of benefit to these companies being able to operate in a much more deregulated environment. But think about what I thought about when I read the article was the marketing perspective, which BC also did mention. I mean, there's a piece of this that says if you're a company that does very tightly conform to what the EPA wants and what OSHA demands, and you can say that, communicate that to your consumers, they will trust you more, they may buy from you more. So there's a marketing component to this too.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I'm saying? There's a lot going on here.
And also the whole risk mitigation bit. I mean, that's where his statement there at the end, maybe it makes sense to plow those savings back into what you're doing in terms of EHS.
Right. It's good. It's a good point. I mean, I don't think we've had Peter Busey write for us before. We've had LNS people write for us before.
Well, no, I think he had one other article. Actually, all the folks at LNS,
great stuff.
Really sharp writers
there.
Yep.